Garrett Holland had been building custom furniture in Whitefish, Montana for 35 years, creating beautiful pieces from wood that would last generations. At 59, he had a successful carpentry business, a comfortable home he'd built himself, and a good marriage to Paula, a retired schoolteacher. But Garrett hadn't always been a carpenter. He'd grown up on his parents' cattle ranch outside Kalispell, working with Red Angus cattle from age 10 to 25. He'd been good at it. His father always said Garrett could read cattle better than anyone he'd known. At 25, Garrett discovered carpentry and never looked back. He'd built a different life, raised 2 kids, created a successful business. He rarely thought about cattle anymore. Until his daughter Nicole called on October 12th. "Dad, I need you to look at something," Nicole said. "There's a Facebook post about a bull that survived a barn fire. He's badly injured. An animal rescue is trying to find someone with cattle experience to help him, but nobody wants him because treatment will cost tens of thousands of dollars." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I remember you telling me about saving calves from a fire when you were young. You said it was one of the most important things you'd ever done. When I saw this post, I thought of you." "Nicole, I haven't worked with cattle in 34 years. Just look at the post. That's all I'm asking." After hanging up, Garrett sat in his workshop before finally opening Facebook and finding the post from Casey Reed at Mountain Valley Animal Rescue. The photograph stopped him cold. A Red Angus bull, dark reddish-brown, maybe 1,900 pounds, lying in a dirt paddock. Burns covered his left side, his front leg heavily bandaged, but his head was raised, eyes looking directly at the camera. Those eyes held something Garrett recognized from decades ago: the will to survive. The caption read, "This is Duke, 6-year-old Red Angus bull who survived a barn fire 3 days ago. Second and third degree burns covering 30% of his body, smoke inhalation damage, fractured front leg. Owner cannot afford the estimated $25,000, $40,000 in veterinary treatment. We have 72 hours to find someone with large animal experience willing to take responsibility for Duke's recovery, or he will be humanely euthanized. Duke survived the impossible. He deserves a chance to heal." Garrett stared at the photograph for a long time, remembering the 3 calves he'd helped his father save from a barn fire in 1991. The satisfaction of nursing them back to health. His father saying, "What we did mattered. Those calves are alive because we didn't give up." It had been 34 years. He had a successful business, a comfortable life. This wasn't his problem. But those eyes, that determination. The post was 4 hours old. Duke had maybe 68 hours left. Garrett walked into the house where Paula was cooking dinner. She looked up, saw his expression, and immediately knew something had changed. "What's wrong?" He showed her the photograph, explained Nicole's call, the 72-hour deadline. Paula studied the photo, then studied Garrett. After 29 years of marriage, she could read him perfectly. "You want to help him. I know it sounds crazy. I haven't worked with cattle in decades. It would be expensive and complicated. But you want to try." Garrett nodded. "I look at that bull and I remember what it felt like to make that kind of difference, to save something everyone else had given up on." Paula smiled. "How far away is the ranch?" Garrett checked the post. "Near Big Fork. About 3 hours southeast." "When do you want to leave?" "You're not saying I'm insane?" "Garrett, you're incredibly good at carpentry. But there's something about you when you talk about your parents' ranch, a light that doesn't show up when you talk about furniture. If you think you can help this bull, we should try. I should at least go see him, get a real assessment before committing." "Then go. Tonight. You've got 68 hours. Garrett called the number on Casey Reed's post. A woman answered, sounding exhausted. "Mountain Valley Animal Rescue, this is Casey. My name is Garrett Holland. I'm calling about Duke. The Red Angus from the barn fire, is he still available?" Pause. Then Casey's voice came back emotional. "Yes. Do you have cattle experience?" "I grew up on a cattle ranch. Worked with Red Angus for 15 years. I've been out of ranching for a long time, but I know livestock. I'd like to come see Duke, assess his condition." "When can you come?" Garrett checked his watch. 6:47 p.m. Tonight, I can be there by 10. Mr. Holland, Duke's injuries are severe. Vet bills will be substantial. Recovery isn't guaranteed. I understand, but I'd like to try. I'll text you the address. Thank you. You're the first person who's called. After hanging up, Garrett stood in his kitchen feeling something he hadn't felt in 34 years. The combination of nervousness and purpose that came from deciding to fight for an animal's life. I'm going, he told Paula. I know, she said, kissing his cheek. Drive safe. Trust your instincts. You knew cattle once. You still do. 20 minutes later, Garrett was driving southeast through Montana darkness toward a bull he'd never met but couldn't abandon. 3 hours to remember everything his father had taught him. 3 hours to wonder if he was crazy for driving through the night when he had a perfectly good life that didn't include livestock. But as Garrett drove with Duke's eyes burned into his memory, he realized something. Maybe this wasn't just about saving a bull. Maybe it was about rediscovering a part of himself he'd thought was gone forever. The highway stretched ahead, rain starting to hit the windshield, and Garrett Holland, carpenter, husband, father, drove toward the most important decision he'd made in 3 decades. In 68 hours, Duke would either get a chance to live or be euthanized. Garrett intended to make sure it was the former, even if he had no idea yet how he was going to pull it off. The rain started 20 minutes into the drive, light at first, then heavier as Garrett Holland pushed southeast on Highway 93 toward Big Fork. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm against the darkness, and Garrett's headlights cut through sheets of water that blurred the road ahead. 3 hours alone in a truck gave a man time to think, time to question, time to remember. Garrett's phone sat in the cup holder, Casey Reed's address glowing on the screen. Riverside Ranch, 2847 Valley Road, Big Fork. ETA, 9:52 p.m. The rescue coordinator had texted him detailed directions and a warning. Duke is in rough shape. Prepare yourself. Garrett had responded simply, Understood. See you soon. But as the miles passed and the rain intensified, doubt crept in. What was he really doing? He was 59 years old, owned a carpentry business that demanded his full attention, had a wife who deserved a peaceful retirement, and zero experience with veterinary medicine beyond what his father had taught him 3 decades ago. Saving Duke would require money Garrett hadn't budgeted for, time he didn't have, skills he wasn't sure he still possessed. Yet he kept driving. The highway curved through mountain passes, past darkened farmland and sleeping towns. Garrett passed Kalispell, where his parents' old ranch had been, sold 8 years ago, now a subdivision. He'd driven past it once and never gone back, too painful to see homes where cattle pastures used to be. His phone rang. Paula. How's the drive? She asked. Rainy. I'm about 90 minutes out. Are you okay? You've been quiet since you left. Garrett was silent for a moment, trying to articulate what he was feeling. I keep thinking about the last time I worked with injured cattle. I was 24. Dad and I spent 3 weeks nursing a calf through pneumonia. We took shifts staying with her in the barn, monitoring her breathing, administering antibiotics. She survived. You saved her. Dad saved her. I just helped. And that was 35 years ago, Paula. What if I've forgotten everything? What if I get there and realize I can't do this? Then you'll figure it out. Garrett, you're driving 3 hours in a rainstorm to help an animal you've never met. That tells me you haven't forgotten what matters. The skills might be rusty, but the instinct is still there. After hanging up, Garrett felt marginally better. Paula was right. He wouldn't have made this drive if some part of him didn't believe he could help. The rain eased as he crossed into Flathead County. Small towns gave way to rural darkness. Ranches and farmland stretched between pockets of forest. This was the Montana Garrett had grown up in, the landscape that had shaped his childhood. He thought about his father, Raymond Holland, who'd ranched for 42 years before retiring to Arizona. Raymond had taught Garrett everything about cattle, how to read their body language, recognize illness, handle emergencies. Cattle don't complain, Raymond used to say. You have to watch, pay attention. They'll tell you what's wrong if you know how to listen. Garrett wondered what his father would say about this midnight rescue mission. Probably something like, If you're going to do it right. Don't half-ass animal care. At 9:35 p.m., Garrett's phone GPS announced, "In 2 miles, turn right onto Valley Road." His heart rate picked up. This was real. In 15 minutes, he'd see Duke, assess his injuries, decide if recovery was possible, commit to something that would change his comfortable life. Valley Road was gravel, winding through dark farmland. Garrett's headlights caught reflective signs marking driveways, mailboxes with ranch names. At 9:48 p.m., he spotted the address, 2847, Riverside Ranch. A long driveway led to a modest farmhouse, barn, and several outbuildings. Lights were on in the barn. A white pickup truck was parked outside. Casey Reed's, presumably. Garrett pulled in, killed the engine, and sat for a moment gathering himself. Through the rain-speckled windshield, he could see a woman emerging from the barn, early 30s, wearing mud-covered jeans and a rain jacket, blonde hair pulled back. She waved, gesturing for Garrett to come inside. He grabbed his jacket and stepped into the rain. "Mr. Holland?" the woman called over the downpour. "Garrett, you must be Casey. Thank you for coming." She looked exhausted, grateful, and worried all at once. "Duke is in the barn. I should warn you. It's worse than the photo showed. The burns, the leg injury. He's in bad shape." "I understand." Casey led him into the barn, a large structure with several stalls and a medical area set up in the corner. Veterinary supplies, medications, bandages. And in the largest stall, lying on thick bedding, was Duke. Garrett stopped, taking in the full extent of the bull's injuries. The photograph hadn't captured it. The burns covering Duke's left side were severe, raw, blistered skin, where the hide had been damaged by fire. His front left leg was splinted and wrapped, clearly fractured. His breathing was labored, each breath requiring visible effort. But when Duke heard footsteps, his head lifted, those same dark brown eyes from the photograph fixed on Garrett, alert, aware, fighting. "Dear God," Garrett whispered. "The barn fire happened 4 days ago," Casey explained quietly. "Duke somehow broke through a wall to escape. The owner found him collapsed in the field. Local vets stabilized him, but said recovery would require months of intensive care and cost upward of $40,000. The owner can't afford it. Neither can our rescue. We've been posting everywhere trying to find help." "And nobody responded?" "You're the first call we've gotten. Most people see the vet bills and the uncertainty and walk away." Garrett moved closer to the stall. Duke watched him approach, tense but not aggressive. Garrett had seen that look before, an animal in pain, wary of humans, but too exhausted to resist. "Can I go in?" Garrett asked. "Slowly. He's been through hell." Garrett opened the stall door and stepped inside, moving carefully, keeping his body language calm and non-threatening. Duke's ears flicked forward, tracking his movement. "Easy, boy," Garrett said softly, using the same tone his father had used with nervous cattle. "I'm not here to hurt you." He knelt about 6 feet from Duke, close enough to be present but far enough to give space. The bull's breathing was rough, damaged lungs struggling. The burns looked agonizing. But Duke was alive, fighting, refusing to give up. Garrett felt something shift inside him, a certainty he hadn't felt since leaving his parents' ranch 34 years ago. "I can help him," Garrett said. Casey looked stunned. "You're sure?" "I'm sure I can try. The burns will need daily treatment. The leg will take months to heal. He'll need antibiotics, pain management, constant monitoring. It won't be easy." "And the cost?" "I'll figure it out." Garrett stood, still watching Duke. "What do I need to do to take custody?" "Sign papers agreeing to assume all veterinary costs and care responsibilities. The owner is willing to transfer ownership to anyone who'll save Duke's life." "Then let's do it. Tonight." Casey's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Holland, Garrett, you have no idea what this means." Garrett looked at Duke, at the bull who'd survived the impossible and was still fighting. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I do." An hour later, paperwork signed, Garrett stood alone in the barn with Duke, rain drumming on the roof. "All right, boy," he said. "We've got a long road ahead, but we're going to walk it together." Duke made a soft sound, his eyes never leaving Garrett's face. And Garrett Holland, who'd spent 34 years building furniture, felt purpose he hadn't felt in decades. The veterinarian arrived at 7 a.m. the next morning. Dr. Mitchell Kane, a large animal specialist from Big Fork who'd been treating Duke since the fire. At 47, Kane had seen his share of livestock injuries, but his expression when he examined Duke was grim. "Mr. Holland, I need to be honest with you," Kane said after a thorough examination. "Duke's injuries are severe. The burns cover approximately 30% of his body, second and third degree. His left front leg has a compound fracture that's already started healing incorrectly. His lungs took significant smoke damage. Treatment will be extensive, expensive, and recovery isn't guaranteed." Garrett, who'd spent the night in the barn monitoring Duke, nodded. "What's the treatment plan?" Kane seemed surprised by the directness. "Daily wound care for the burns. Cleaning, antibiotic ointment, bandage changes. That alone will take 2 hours daily for at least 3 months. The leg needs to be rebroken and properly set, which means surgery. Antibiotics for infection risk. Pain management. Respiratory therapy for the lung damage. We're looking at minimum 6 months of intensive care." "And the cost?" "Surgery alone is $12,000. Medications, supplies, follow-up care. You're looking at $35,000 to $40,000 total." Garrett thought about his savings account, the truck he'd planned to replace, the vacation Paula had mentioned. Then he looked at Duke, who was watching this conversation with those alert, determined eyes. "Do the surgery," Garrett said. "Whatever he needs." "Mr. Holland, I have to ask, why? You don't know this bull. You could walk away." "I grew up ranching. My father taught me that if an animal is fighting to live, we have an obligation to fight with them. Duke survived a barn fire. He broke through a wall to escape. He's been lying here for 4 days, refusing to give up. How can I do less?" Kane studied Garrett for a moment, then nodded with respect. "I'll schedule surgery for tomorrow. Meanwhile, I'll show you how to do the wound care. You'll need to learn. Nobody can afford to pay a vet tech to do this daily for months." For the next 2 hours, Kane taught Garrett the meticulous process of cleaning and treating burn wounds, administering medication, monitoring for infection signs. It was harder than Garrett remembered from his ranching days, more precise, more demanding. But his hands remembered. The careful touch, the steady movements, the patience required. By noon, Garrett had called Paula to explain he wouldn't be home for several days. Called his carpentry clients to reschedule projects. Called Casey to arrange temporary boarding at Riverside Ranch until he could transport Duke somewhere permanent. "Where will you take him after surgery?" Casey asked. Garrett hadn't thought that far ahead. His 5-acre property in Whitefish had a small shed, but nothing suitable for a recovering bull. "I'll figure something out." That evening, Paula arrived with supplies, blankets, a camping cot, fresh clothes for Garrett. She found him in the barn, sitting beside Duke's stall, exhausted but determined. "You're really doing this," she said. "Yeah, I really am." Paula looked at Duke, the massive injured bull who'd somehow become her husband's responsibility. "What happens after he recovers?" "I don't know yet. Maybe we keep him. Maybe we find him a good home. Right now, I'm just focused on getting him through surgery." "Garrett, this is going to change our lives. You know that, right?" "I know. If you want me to walk away..." "I don't want you to walk away. I want you to save him." Paula smiled. "I married a rancher's son who became a carpenter. Maybe it's time to remember you're both." The next morning, Dr. Kane arrived with a surgical team. Duke was sedated, loaded carefully onto a trailer, and transported to Kane's veterinary facility in Big Fork. Garrett paced the waiting room for 6 hours while Kane and his team worked to repair the fractured leg, re-breaking the bone, setting it properly, inserting pins and plates to stabilize it. At 4 p.m., Kane emerged, exhausted but satisfied. Surgery went well. The bone is set correctly now. He'll need 8 weeks of limited mobility for it to heal properly, then gradual rehabilitation. But Garrett, he's got a real chance now. When Garrett was finally allowed to see Duke in recovery, the bull was groggy from anesthesia, but alive. The leg was in a heavy cast, the burns freshly bandaged, IV lines providing fluids and antibiotics. Garrett stood beside the recovery stall, one hand resting gently on Duke's shoulder. "You made it through, boy," he said quietly. "Now the real work begins." Duke's eyes opened slowly, unfocused but aware. And in that moment, Garrett felt something he hadn't felt in 34 years. The profound satisfaction of fighting for an animal's life and winning. The road ahead was long, the costs were mounting, the logistics were complicated. But Garrett Holland had made a commitment, and he intended to keep it, no matter what it took. 3 months after surgery, Duke stood in a converted barn on Garrett Holland's property in Whitefish, Montana, looking stronger every day. Getting him there hadn't been simple. Garrett had spent 2 weeks converting his old storage shed into a proper barn. Insulated walls, heated space, proper ventilation, a large stall with thick bedding. Paula had helped, along with their son-in-law who worked construction. They'd built it together while Duke recovered at Dr. Kane's facility. The veterinary bills had reached $38,000. Garrett had sold his truck, taken out a small loan against his carpentry business, and picked up extra projects. Paula had returned to substitute teaching to help with costs. Their planned kitchen renovation was postponed indefinitely. But Duke was alive, and improving daily. The daily routine had become second nature to Garrett. Every morning at 6 a.m., he'd enter Duke's stall to change bandages, clean the healing burns, administer medications. The burns that had once been raw and agonizing were now scarred but healing, new skin growing slowly, infection risks decreasing. The leg cast had been removed after 8 weeks, replaced with supportive wrapping that Duke was learning to walk on properly. What surprised Garrett most was the bond that had formed. Duke recognized his footsteps, would lift his head when Garrett approached, had learned to stand calmly during the twice-daily medical treatments. The aggressive wariness from those first days had transformed into trust. Dr. Kane visited weekly, consistently impressed. "I've never seen a bull recover this well from burns this severe. Whatever you're doing, Garrett, it's working." What Garrett was doing was simple. Showing up. Every single day, twice a day without fail. Talking to Duke during treatments, keeping him company, refusing to give up even when progress seemed impossibly slow. By December, 4 months after the fire, Duke could walk short distances without limping. The burns had healed enough that bandages were only needed on the worst areas. His breathing had improved as his lungs recovered from smoke damage. He'd gained back the weight he'd lost. His coat was glossy and healthy. Nicole visited one Saturday and found her father in the barn, brushing Duke's coat while the bull stood contentedly munching hay. "Dad, he looks amazing," Nicole said, genuinely awed. "When I saw that first photo, I honestly didn't think he'd survive." "Neither did I," Garrett admitted. "But he wanted to live. My job was just to give him the chance." "Do you regret it? The money, the time, everything you gave up?" Garrett thought about the sold truck, the postponed renovations, the exhausting daily schedule he'd maintained for months. Then he looked at Duke. Healthy, strong, alive. Not for a second. Paula joined them, carrying coffee. Dr. Kane called. "He wants to do a final assessment next week. If Duke passes, he'll be cleared for normal activity." "Normal activity meaning what?" Nicole asked. "Meaning he can live like a regular bull," Garrett said. "Pasture time, interaction with other cattle eventually. A real life, not just recovery." That evening, Garrett sat on a hay bale in the barn, watching Duke rest peacefully in his stall. The bull that had been dying 4 months ago was now healthy and whole. The journey had been expensive, exhausting, and all-consuming. But it had also given Garrett something he'd been missing for 34 years. Purpose beyond carpentry. The satisfaction of saving a life. The fulfillment of using skills he'd thought were buried in his past. Paula found him there at sunset. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that when I left ranching at 25, I thought I was done with that life forever. I built a good career, a good life, but standing here now, I realize I wasn't done. I just needed the right reason to come back to it." Duke was the right reason? Duke was the catalyst. But it's bigger than him now. I've been researching livestock sanctuaries, rescue operations. There are animals like Duke everywhere. Bulls, horses, cattle that get injured and their owners can't afford treatment. They get euthanized because nobody will take a chance on them. Paula studied her husband. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe this doesn't end with Duke. Maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing with the second half of my life. Carpentry pays the bills, but this, he gestured toward Duke, this matters in a different way. You want to start a rescue operation? Maybe, eventually. For now, I just want to make sure Duke has the best life possible. But if another animal needs help and I can provide it, Garrett trailed off, then smiled. I guess I'm a rancher again, just a different kind than my father was. Paula kissed his cheek. Your father would be proud. You saved a life everyone else gave up on. That's exactly what he taught you to do. 2 weeks later, Dr. Kane conducted his final examination and declared Duke fully recovered. Medically, he's cleared for normal activity. Garrett, you've accomplished something remarkable here. That afternoon, Garrett led Duke out of the barn for the first time in months into the small pasture behind his property. Duke stepped cautiously at first, testing his healed leg. Then, with growing confidence, walked into the open space. Garrett watched the bull, scarred but strong, injured but healed, stand in the Montana sunshine, free and alive because someone had refused to give up. And Garrett Holland, who'd spent 34 years building furniture, realized he'd built something far more important: a second chance. For Duke. And for himself. 6 months after the barn fire, Garrett Holland stood in his pasture watching Duke graze peacefully alongside 2 elderly dairy cows he'd recently rescued from slaughter. What had started as one desperate midnight drive had transformed into Holland Haven Livestock Rescue, a small sanctuary Garrett officially registered in March. His carpentry business still operated part-time for income, but the rescue had become his primary focus. Paula managed volunteer coordination, handling steady calls from people wanting to help or surrender animals. Their daughter Nicole brought her students weekly to volunteer. Their son visited monthly from Seattle to help with barn construction. The local newspaper's feature story about Duke's recovery had generated donations covering the remaining veterinary debt and establishing a fund for future rescues. Dr. Kane offered discounted rates. Casey Reed referred cases regularly. Duke had become the sanctuary's ambassador. When children visited, Garrett would explain, 6 months ago, nobody wanted Duke. Everyone thought he was too damaged to save, but he fought to live, and we fought with him. People would look at Duke, healthy, strong, gentle, and understand that rescue meant giving second chances. That April morning, a rancher called about a 28-year-old arthritic mare he could no longer keep. Would you consider taking her? Garrett looked at Duke and the expanding sanctuary that had become his life's purpose. Yes. When can you bring her? After hanging up, Garrett walked into the pasture. Duke approached and pressed his forehead gently against Garrett's chest. Their daily ritual. You started all this, Garrett told him quietly. 1 photograph, 1 3-hour drive. And now, look what we've built. Paula joined them. The mare arrives tomorrow. 4 rescues now. Can we handle this? We'll figure it out. Same way we figured out Duke. You've completely changed your life at 59. Most people don't do that. Most people don't drive 3 hours in a rainstorm to see a dying bull. I'm glad you did. This is who you were always meant to be. Garrett thought about his ranching father, the 15 years learning from him, the 34 years building furniture, all leading to this moment, doing work that mattered in ways carpentry never had. That evening, Garrett posted Duke's photo on Facebook. 6 months ago, this bull was hours from euthanasia. Nobody wanted him. Today, Duke is thriving. Proof that with patience and compassion, even the most broken can heal. If you know an animal needing a second chance, we're here. The post was shared 5,000 times. Donations poured in. Calls came from across Montana. And Garrett Holland, who'd spent 30 years as a carpenter, found himself exactly where he belonged, giving second chances to animals the world had abandoned. Starting with Duke, who'd refused to give up, and a man who'd refused to let him. Duke lifted his head in the spring sunshine, scars visible but healed, living proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe in something everyone else has given up on. And sometimes, saving someone else's life is exactly what you need to save your own. No one wanted the injured bull that survived, until a retired farmer drove 3 hours to see him.